Before we get into the editing of images, we first need to understand that images are taken with many different formats. With your iPhone, the most common is going to be JPEG or HEIF, but if you have a Pro-line iPhone, then you'll also have access to RAW images. On your iPhone, if you navigate to your settings, scroll down to Camera, and open up the Formats section at the top, you'll be able to change the format that your iPhone's built-in camera records images with. Since iOS 11, by default, your iPhone will capture images in high efficiency mode or HEIF format. You can also select most compatible, which is JPEG format. Or if you have a Pro-line iPhone, you'll have a third selection here for Apple Pro RAW. This is a DNG file, or better known as a RAW file. In the next few slides, we'll discuss the differences of each of these formats and hopefully narrow down which format is the right one for you. The difference in all of these files ultimately lies in the amount of information that they contain and their size. I'll be talking about JPEG and HEIF in conjunction because they compress image information in a very similar way. They're virtually indistinguishable from one another. HEIF files are simply smaller in size than JPEGs. Chances are you already have experience using JPEG files, since this file type is what most digital cameras default to. These file types are quite small because they compress image information. RAW files, on the other hand, contain uncompressed image information captured by your camera sensor, which results in bigger file sizes. When JPEG or HEIF files compress image data, they are effectively developing or editing your image, whereas RAW files simply capture the information in front of them according to the exposure that you've set. Unedited RAW files will look much more neutral than a JPEG or HEIF file straight out of camera, but they're going to leave you with full control over editing that image. Since RAW files capture uncompressed information, you'll have better success saving highlight or shadow detail in your images and altering color. Overall, you will have a lot more flexibility for editing with RAW files. On this slide, we can see a visual comparison between the flexibility of a DNG or a RAW image versus a JPEG image. In each column, there is a before and after of a typical adjustment. The first adjustment that we see is a white balance adjustment. Both of the original images in this first section were taken under colored light, which is very common for events and can be quite a hassle to fix in editing. A friend of mine sent me this Apple Pro RAW file, and you can see that we're able to correct this color cast fully to where our colors look natural again. With the JPEG file, under these extreme color circumstances, even after adjusting the color temperature and tint, the skin tones and other colors in the image appear unnatural. The second adjustment is an exposure adjustment. These images were taken purposefully where the highlights were quite overexposed. With the JPEG image, even as we bring down our exposure, the highlight detail appears overly bright because all of that information was lost when we took the image and compressed it. However, with the DNG or RAW image, as we reduce our exposure, we can see detail actually reveal itself in the highlights, and the end result is actually a quite natural looking image. Ultimately, the decision on which format to choose here is a personal one. Even though RAW images offer more flexibility than a JPEG, you can still get away with some creative editing with JPEG images. There's many considerations to make before deciding which of these formats to shoot with. Ultimately, it comes down to the amount of available storage you have and if you want to be editing your images every single time you take them. Strictly speaking, from an editing perspective, if you know that you're going to edit your photos and you're not afraid to deep dive into an edit, then you might as well shoot with RAW and give yourself some more information to play with. But if you don't want to do too much editing and you want your image to already have a developed look out of camera, then JPEG or HEIF format would probably be your best bet. If you're choosing between either JPEG or HEIF, I would almost always recommend HEIF since it's going to save you space and allow you to take more images while not really losing much quality. However, certain situations like sending images to an old device or opening in older softwares might make the most compatible or JPEG format better for you. You can certainly still use JPEG or HEIF images to get good results in your editing process. Just be mindful when you're shooting that you should be striving to get your exposure and white balance correct in camera because it's very hard to correct that with this image file. Generally, for exposure, you should be exposing for your highlights since those details are a lot harder to recover in editing. It's probably worth noting that I'm using an iPhone 12 mini right now, and I don't have access to the Apple Pro RAW format. I have used it in the past and was quite impressed with the information that it captured and how much I was able to push it in editing while still looking natural. But for anyone watching that doesn't have access to Apple Pro RAW, don't feel left out or like you need to run to get yourself a Pro-line iPhone. I've taken some of my favorite photos as JPEGs or HEIFs, and as long as you have your exposure and white balance correct, you can still edit these to great result. Even if you don't have a Pro-line iPhone, you can actually still shoot in a RAW format using the Lightroom mobile camera. Within the Lightroom camera, you'll see an icon at the top that is going to say either JPEG or DNG. Tap on this and you'll open a menu that allows you to select the DNG format. This is actually how I was able to put together the comparison for exposure correction on the slide before. That's all for this section on image formats. It's probably the most technical lesson that we're going to discuss today, so congrats to you for making it through. I hope that you're leaving this section confident with your selection of one of these formats, and if not, the best thing that you can do is experiment with each one and slowly find out which format works best for you.